I wanted to talk about Bakhmut. I can't even pronounce the Russian pronunciation of the city, but I wanted to ask you all about, because there is this kind of dual dynamic happening. You have Zelensky traveling all over the world, and before this, there was all kinds of musical chairs happening in the government. And then Ukraine participated in terrorist attack after terrorist attack on journalists, and then, of course, the drone strike on the Kremlin. And he was in Europe. Now he's in Saudi Arabia. Soon he'll be in Hiroshima. A stunning lecture to the Arab countries on the conflict itself and their lack of understanding of it. It seemed like he was trying to insinuate. But I wanted to ask you all about Bakhmut, like, and this world tour. Like, how are these things related? Because it seems like I heard today in Reuters several hours ago that Ukraine is making gains in Bakhmut. And then I'm hearing in other places, not only from Russian sources, but also from just earlier reports of the mainstream media, that it's days to weeks from being complete Russian control. I mean, what's the reality here? And maybe we can also talk about the Zelensky world tour afterward, but maybe we can tackle Bakhmut first, whoever, Alexander.
Well, very briefly, and this is the military thing. I mean, there's Bakhmut, the town, which is almost now completely captured by the Russians. And over the last couple of hours, literally today, there's been more reports of more Russian advances in the... I mean, we're talking about a couple of buildings now that are left on the very western edge of Bakhmut. I mean, if you look at, you actually see pictures, you can get all of these buildings now in one sort of photo. I mean, it's a very small area still to be captured. And it's going to be captured, and it's going to be captured, some people say, by Sunday. I mean, I'm not going to try and provide exact dates, but we are very close to the end of the fighting there. What you also have is an attempted Ukrainian counterattack along the flanks on each side of Bakhmut. Now, what my impression is that this attack, this offensive, hasn't achieved anything so far of any significance, except that it's lost Ukraine a lot of men and a lot of machines. They've captured some fields, some open fields in some places. They've threatened some villages. They're very far from surrounding Bakhmut, as some people are talking about. But there's been suggestions from people in Russia that this is all basically intended more to say to people once Bakhmut falls, oh, but it hasn't really fallen. The fighting is still going on. We're still attacking in various places. The battle is far from over. So there's that side. It's also possibly intended to keep the Americans and the Western powers at peace by saying, well, look, we haven't actually launched our great offensive, but we are advancing. We are advancing on the flanks. We're capturing the odd village here, the odd field there, even as the main town, the place we were supposed to be defending, falls under Russian control. So I think this is really what the whole story is. But Bakhmut itself, I think the story there is almost done. I mean, one can fantasize or imagine some dramatic change, but I can't really see that dramatic change is going to happen. And all of the reports, the accumulated reports that I now see, is that in order to carry out these counterattacks, these little counterattacks on each side of the city, the effect has been hundreds, perhaps thousands of Ukrainian soldiers killed and wounded. And there have been some rather distressing pictures of Ukrainian cemeteries filling up again with more dead bodies.
Yeah, I think Bakhmut has worked out really well for the Russian military. I mean, they managed to suck in all of the elite Ukraine forces and then some, and basically you had Wagner PMCs, not 100%, but a large portion of the fighting was by Wagner, and it allowed the entire Russian military to dig in and rest up and fortify their positions. And here you have a PMC outfit, which has essentially defeated NATO's strongest military. Not my words, Kissinger's words. Kissinger's words. NATO's, Europe's strongest military. That's what he said yesterday or a couple of days ago in The Economist. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. Wagner has defeated the strongest European military in NATO, and the Russians now have 500,000 soldiers who are dug in and well rested, and they're ready to either defend or to do who knows what. Bakhmut was a disaster for Ukraine, a disaster. And every time I see memes on like Twitter from like pro-Ukrainian sources, and they're happy that Bakhmut holds. They say Bakhmut holds. I'm like,
NATO loves that.
I'm like, why? Why are you guys celebrating this? Don't you see the trap that's been set up? Don't you see what they're doing to you? But no, they couldn't see it.
Well, what's astounding too is this Reuters report that came out earlier today. For those of you watching maybe later, May 19th, they're saying that Ukraine set up a mousetrap for Wagner. Yeah. It to me, it doesn't make any sense, given that even in the same article, they'll talk about how they'll just say Wagner reports that they still hold the majority of the territory. But you go to the New York Times, you go somewhere else, and they'll say, actually, no, Wagner does hold the majority of the territory. So that level, I mean, your reactions to that, it just seems like there's so much projection going on, and it gets back to this desperation almost that we're talking about of controlling this narrative.
Yes, I mean, I think the other thing to say about Reuters is, of course, it's a British news agency, and the British have particularly invested in this war. And Reuters, I could say it straightforwardly, has always been extremely close to the British government and basically follows the official line. So what the British especially like to do is they take the realities on the ground and they try to reverse them. So Bakhmut has been a trap. It's been a place where the Russians have ground the Ukrainians down. This is obvious to anybody who's been following the situation in the way that Alex has described. It's been obvious for months. And of course, the British Reuters take that story and they turn it upside down. It's a Ukrainian trap. They drew the Russians in there. They ground the Russians down. I don't think anybody who's followed this battle with any degree of attention believes it.
Yeah, and lastly on Bakhmut, once it does fall, I know that you all have been talking about this. What will it mean? I mean, what will it mean for the future of the fighting in particular? Because Ukraine likes to say that they're the ones, and of course Reuters too likes to help them out and say, yeah, we're the ones who are drawing Russia into this trap. But traps are not meant to be used for months and months and months. I would think that traps are meant to then build forward and, kind of decisively defeat your enemy if you've trapped them. But what will it mean when Russia actually does take these last, I think, what is it, like 1,000 people in a couple of buildings or something or other, hundreds of people? Yeah, like what happens then?
Well, can I just quickly say this? I mean, I think that we now have an explanation from the Russians, this argument between the chief of the Wagner PMC, Prigozhin, and the Russian Defense Ministry has actually explained a lot about what Russian plans in Bakhmut were. Apparently, they decided to do this back in October. And this was at the time when Ukraine was carrying out all those offensives. The Russians needed time to reorganize, to fortify, to build up their forces, to train the hundreds of thousands of reservists that they'd called up. So the Russian general and overall command, a man called Surovikin, had this discussion with Prigozhin, and they came up with this plan. We're going to create this trap for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut. Our objective is not so much to capture this particular town, it's to get the Ukrainians to defend it week after week, month after month, bleed them dry, and that will do exactly what Alex says. It will give us time to train up our forces, re-equip, re-fortify, do all of those things. And I think it's exceeded their expectations, because the Ukrainians went on falling into this trap week after week, month after month, long past the point that the Russians expected. And the Russians, who perhaps were not really so fixed back in October on capturing Bakhmut, because that wasn't the original plan, now find that they're about to capture Bakhmut. And we've discussed its importance many times. The point about Bakhmut is it's part of the hub of the transportation systems. It links together all the Ukrainian defense lines in Donbass. I personally think what the Russians will do is that they've captured it, they'll clear all the surrounding villages, they'll consolidate their control, and then they will wait, which is what their consistent pattern has been. And then they will see off this Ukrainian offensive, and that will put them in a stronger position once they hold Bakhmut to push further west. But that, I think, is their most likely plan based on what I know.
Yeah, I mean, Zelensky, he put himself in a media box with Bakhmut, in a propaganda media box. He went to the United States in December. He went in front of Congress. He said that Bakhmut was going to be the turning point. His words, not mine. That is what he told Congress. That is what he told the Democrats, the Republicans. That's what he told the American people. He turned around, looked at Kamala Harris, presented her, I think it was Nancy Pelosi was there too, presented them with the flag signed by the Bakhmut soldiers in Ukraine. And everyone stood up and they were clapping. And Bakhmut was going to be the turning point of this entire conflict. And he put himself, the entire collective West, all of NATO, they put themselves in a media box, a media hole with Bakhmut. And even if you believe the narrative that Bakhmut is a trap for Wagner, okay, it's a trap. What exactly was the trap? That Wagner ends up taking the entire city? Is that the trap? Even if the losses are 1-to-1, I don't know. Let's just say the losses are equal. What's the trap exactly? That Russia still has 500,000 Russian military ready and waiting, while Ukraine's military has been completely committed to this one city? I mean, what exactly is the trap that they set up for the Russians, for the Russian military, for the Russian Federation? It doesn't make any sense at all. This was a media trap that they themselves created to themselves.